So the co-main event for UFC 299, Benoit Saint Denis, big step up in competition.
Yeah.
He's going to be taking on fan favorite Dustin the Diamond Poirier. And listen, this is a really big fight for BSD. I know he's a 2-1 favorite, but we can't forget about just how good Dustin Poirier is, specifically his boxing. And when you look at who he's fought, and even more impressively, who he's defeated in his UFC career, it's a laundry list of names that you would be very impressed by. So BSD has a real shot here to put himself on the fast track to title contention with a victory. I want to break down the fight and make a prediction. How do you see this one playing out?
I love this fight, and this one's a really interesting one to break down. But before we go into the X's and O's, we got to talk about the fact that Benoit Saint Denis is a monster, but he should not be the 2-1 favorite over Dustin Poirier. This is Dustin Poirier we're talking about.
The Diamond.
Yeah, and remember everybody about a year ago was saying that there's like a veterans league of 155, and then there's like the real contenders of 155.
Right.
And the veterans obviously are kind of like Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje. These guys, they sit and they kind of have their good old boys club at the top, and then there's a bunch of monsters, Mateusz Gamrot, Fiziev, Arman Saruki, and I guess BSD is now in that group. But those are the real best fighters at 155. And then Justin Gaethje's like, okay, well, then throw me that Fiziev fella. And then he just dismantles him, beats him at his own game. Dustin Poirier is having that same exact opportunity right here. Look, Dustin Poirier beats everybody. Dustin Poirier, he's never going to be the guy that's known as a specialist or a world expert on one specific thing, except for MMA. He's good absolutely everywhere. Of course, his boxing shines a little bit brighter than everything else in his arsenal, but Dustin Poirier knows how to get his hand raised. He's been in the game so long. He's still at the very top of the game, and I think everybody's overlooking him, and they're starting to say, all right, these guys that were at the top of 155 for the past 5 years, they've had their run. Now it's time for a fresh coat of paint. I don't see it that way. I think Dustin Poirier knows exactly what he needs to do to beat Benoit Saint Denis. And I think Benoit Saint Denis has way less ways to get his hand raised against Dustin. Because if you ask me, we can kind of X out the ground. I don't really see this fight taking place very much on the ground. I think this is going to be a striking battle, and I think Benoit Saint Denis brings a lot of power. He packs a ton of power in those punches, and he's a pressure fighter with 100% finish rate. So you have to respect that, his ability to find his target and put the lights out on the people he fights. But at the same time, this is Dustin Poirier. Like I said, he's one of the best fighters on the UFC's roster. He's so good everywhere. And if you want to stand and strike with him, you're likely going to wind up on the canvas. You're likely going to watch him get his hand raised and maintain in that top 5 position. And I just think Dustin Poirier is getting overlooked, not only by the fans, not only by the UFC, but I guess BSD as well.
Yeah, I love everything you're saying about Dustin Poirier, and I love Dustin Poirier, but I am going to take BSD to win this fight for a couple of reasons, and here's why. I don't necessarily subscribe to the fact that this fight is not going to take place on the ground. I think there is a chance that it does. And when you look at how Dustin has lost the fights that he's lost, almost 50% of his losses have come by submission.
Yeah.
All of those submissions have been by choke, either rear naked choke or some modification thereof.
Yeah.
Now, BSD has more submission victories, I think 9 submission victories on his record, and only 4 knockouts. So, yes, we saw that amazing head kick against Matt Frivola, but BSD, if you just looked at the record, he's a submission guy, and he wins by choke. So, I don't think that we can discount that. Now, that's not going to be my prediction for method of victory. My prediction is going to be a TKO finish. Wow. And the other point that I wanted to make was when Dustin fought Justin Gaethje last, he did something that was almost a tell or a tendency that I saw that I didn't really love and does give me some concern for the BSD fight. He ducks his head to one side or the other sometimes, and it's almost unprompted. And then he got caught with that head kick by Justin Gaethje. I think Justin probably picked up on that tendency, and he was able to land that brutal head kick. BSD is really good about landing lethal strikes in the moments of separation in the fight.
Yeah.
When the scrambles and things of that nature. So Dustin's got to be really careful not to have the tendency to duck his head to the left or duck his head to the right, because if he does, within a split second, Benoit has shown us that he can get that leg up there and deliver absolute fight-ending power. Yeah. So I think that BSD is going to land the power shots with his hands. He's going to land some good kicks to the body, to the legs, and then ultimately the head kick as well. And I see Dustin being a very difficult person to contend with in the striking realm, especially when it comes to fighting inside of boxing range. But I think Benoit is going to be well prepared for this fight, and I think he's going to win by technical knockout.
Well, one thing Dustin comes into this fight with is a ton of experience, way more than the Frenchman. And look, for 27 years old and not being in MMA, but for about 7 or 8 years.
Started training in 2017.
There you go. He's incredible. Remarkable career, remarkable rise, and he belongs in the UFC. If he's able to beat Dustin Poirier, belongs apparently in the top 3 of the most stacked division. But, Benoit Saint Denis has never been in the deep waters of the UFC like Dustin Poirier has. Dustin Poirier lives in those deep waters, and it's only against the best. Khabib, Justin Gaethje, Conor McGregor a couple of times over. All he deals with is the best of the best, the who's who, and the most high-pressure fights. I mean, they don't call him the diamond for nothing. He has ice running through his veins. He doesn't get fazed by these major moments. And while this is certainly not the biggest fight on Dustin Poirier's record, this is absolutely the biggest fight on BSD's. And
by a long shot.
Oh, by a country mile.
Yeah.
BSD is going to go out there and he's going to feel some of those nerves, the same ones that Dustin Poirier felt on his first 5-round fight in the UFC, on his first co-main event of a pay-per-view. We're all human. We all experience those same things. But the more you do it, the more experience you get dealing with it, the better you become at handling it. And I think Dustin Poirier says, y'all must have forgot who I am. I've been at the top of the game for as long as I can remember. Most of you guys weren't even UFC fans when I was at the top fighting for titles, fighting in co-main event slots. This young guy, of course, he's got a lot of promise. I think BSD is going to be a thorn in the side of a lot of 155ers for maybe the next 10 years. But Dustin Poirier is so good, and we always talk about experience, and sometimes that's more of a mental thing, but also it plays into the X's and O's. You don't know what an experienced fighter is going to bring until you watch it happen, and then you see like some light motion, some light little techniques and maneuvers that you didn't know he was going to bring to the table, and maybe you haven't even seen exposed or put on highlight in many years. It could be something as small as when they tie up in the clinch, which I think BSD is going to want to find the fight in at some points. A shoulder shuck that's going to lead to an uppercut. Something small like that he's going to find success doing.
A vet move.
Right. Those are veteran moves. It takes experience to know that sort of stuff. And on top of that, Dustin Poirier's boxing is really solid. So the way he's creative with his boxing defense, his head movement, and then his ability to break out of things like the clinch, break out of things like up against the cage exchanges, those are where you're going to find some unique techniques, unique maneuvers from Dustin Poirier. And I think if BSD sees those types of maneuvers for the first time in the 5-round fight, in the co-main event situation at a UFC's pay-per-view event, he's going to be left with some unanswered questions, and he's going to wonder, how am I going to deal with this? And generally, you need about a week or two to really understand something and how to defend it and how to avoid it. Some guys are really creative and they can figure out ways to defend something within a fight, but that's a rare thing. I can't say from history that I've seen BSD have to deal with anything that really left him,
ability to adjust on the fly is what you're saying.
There you go. Yeah. I've never seen him have to deal with something he was unsure about. I think Dustin Poirier is going to bring all sorts of cool techniques and maneuvers. Obviously, he's coming with a boatload of fundamentals that are going to be impressive, but there's going to be some tricky, sneaky veteran moves that are going to play a factor in this game, and that's why I think it's going to go all 5 rounds. Look, Dustin's no slouch. He's not easy to get out of there. He's very durable, and I think the same can be said for BSD. But I think the pressure, the experience, the fact that it's a 5-round fight, all lean in the favor of Dustin Poirier. And look, 2-1 favorite. MMA sports betting, MMA fans have the worst recency bias of all time. Just because you haven't seen Dustin Poirier in a little while, just because Benoit Saint Denis seems like an invincible force in 155 doesn't mean that Dustin Poirier hasn't seen this type of thing many times over, and that's why I'm leaning towards Dustin to win this fight.
Yeah, and while I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying, it's not going to change my prediction, but I would like to note that Matt Frivola is not Dustin Poirier.
Certainly not.
So to get a head kick finish and to finish the people that Benoit has been finishing leading up to getting this fight, they are levels behind Dustin when it comes to accolades and who he's been in there with. So I don't dispute that at all, but I do think that beginner gains are a real thing, right? And
for
Benoit
sure.
Saint Denis, when you haven't been training, like when you think about Dustin Poirier, he's been doing this since he was a teenager, and he's in his late 30s
Fighting in
now.
parking lots in Louisiana.
Exactly. He's a tough guy. He's been that way his whole life. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, paid in full is what he says, and he embodies that saying in more ways than one. And that, I say all that to say I don't think that Dustin is making the type of improvements fight to fight that Benoit is making.
Yeah.
Benoit is still a guy who's new to the sport. And so, yes, the Benoit that fought Matt Frivola might not have been good enough to beat Dustin Poirier, but I bet you that we see a much better version of Benoit against Poirier at UFC 299 than we did just a few months ago when he knocked out Matt Frivola, because he's still so new to the game. He's still so young, and he's evolving at a more rapid pace than Poirier.
Yeah, I'll leave you with a counter argument to that, because when you do get to the highest level, you can only gain so much percentage in your skills, right? If you're at a 95 and you jump up to 96, that might not seem like much, but Benoit Saint Denis was at a 50 5 years ago, and so now he's jumping up to 75, and those seem like greater leaps. I hate to bring his name into this topic of conversation because he's not anywhere in the same stratosphere as these guys, but look at Jake Paul. His fight camps, when you see him getting ready to fight a basketball player or a video game player, he looked about like a basketball player or a video game player on the videos and on the pads and on the mitts and stuff like that. And now when you watch him getting ready for his most recent fights, he looks like a buttoned up boxer, and that's because of those beginner gains. But that still doesn't mean he's making more progress or surpassing people that are way above him. I think Dustin Poirier is still technically a better fighter than BSD, and while BSD is leaping and lunging towards that same level of fight IQ, fight experience, UFC experience, and just overall skill on the feet and on the ground, he's still not quite where those guys are. And look, like you said, paid in full. Dustin Poirier is tried and true. We know how good he is. We've seen him in there time and time and time again get his hand raised against the best of the world. BSD just doesn't have that on his resume yet, and that's why I have to lean towards the underdog, oddly enough, in this and go with Dustin Poirier. But this one and the main event, Sugar Sean O'Malley, both feel like they're going to go to decision for me. I know there's a ton of great strikers that are in these two fights. Like, every one of these guys can shut the lights out on anybody they fight. But the durability and the evasiveness and the experience of all the guys in the main event and the co-main event tell me that these fights are going to go all 5 rounds. We're going to have electric 25 minutes in the co-main and electric 25 minutes in the main, and I'm really excited for it. But I do have to go with Dustin Poirier. I think he's going to get his hand raised. I think BSD is going to get a little bit of that gas depletion that you feel in a 5-round main event. And he might have done a few 5 rounds before he got to the UFC, but when you get to the UFC and you're in front of that live audience on a pay-per-view card, it's just a different thing, and it can zap your energy a little bit.
Yeah, I can't wait to see how this one plays out.
Me either.